Hello class, today's the 24th of February. What we're going to be doing today in class is we're going to be going through Module 3, Lesson 16. It's really close to the end of this unit, so we're really winding down to the end. What we're going to be doing today in class is we're going to be going through example 1 together. I'm going to be leading you guys through example 1, and hopefully the knowledge you gain from example 1 will help you be able to do these exercises and the 2 questions attached to them. So we are going to do this example 1 together in this video, and then you guys are going to work on these exercises on your own. Let's read example 1. Example 1 is titled Extending Opposite Numbers to the Coordinate Plane. We should definitely know what opposite numbers are at this point. Opposite numbers, we've learned in the beginning of this unit that they are numbers that are the same distance away from 0, but on the opposite side in a different direction. So, for example, 8 and -8, those are going to be opposite numbers because one of them is 8 units to the right, that's positive 8 units to the right of 0, and -8 is going to be 8 units to the left of 0. Those are our opposite numbers. We're also going to be focusing on our coordinate plane. It's a concept that we started talking about and really got into using last lesson. So we're going to be looking at this coordinate plane, and we're going to be talking about opposite numbers. First, it tells us locate and label your points on the coordinate plane to the right. This is the coordinate plane. For each pair of points in this table below, record your observation and conjectures in the appropriate cell. Basically, observe, look at it. What do you see? Pay attention, specifically tells us to pay attention to the absolute values of the coordinates and where points lie in reference to each axis. So those are things that we're going to have to keep in mind as we go forward. So the first thing that it has for us are the points 3, 4, and -3, 4. Actually, 3, 4 is a point that they give us for all 3 columns. So that's going to be our blue point. And it's going to be our blue point for all 3 of them because, well, they're all the exact same point. So it makes sense that it's blue point for all of them. So our point 3, 4 tells me I need to go to the right 3 and up 4. Remember that 3 is my sorry about that. That 3 is my x coordinate, and that 4 is my y coordinate. My first coordinate deals with my x-axis. My second coordinate deals with my y-axis. So my blue point over here at 3, 4. We can then look at our second point, -3, 4. And this one will be red. -3, 4 means that I got to go to -3 on my x-axis. And I've got to go to 4 on my y-axis. Or, what that could also tell me is go to the left 3, go up 4. Both of those get us to the exact same point. This first section here, similarities of coordinates. Before we even get into talking about their location on the plane, we need to just talk about the points themselves, these ordered pairs. We're going to leave location down to what we have here. So, for the similarities of coordinates, I'm looking at my 2 coordinates, 3, 4, and -3, 4, and I'm thinking, well, what's similar about these? Well, one thing is very obviously similar. And that thing that's obviously similar is going to be my y coordinate. My second coordinate is the same on both points. So that's one thing that they have in similar. And I'm looking at it, I don't really I can't really see anything that's similar between them at first glance here. But then I remember the instructions. It says, remember to pay attention to those absolute values. So I'm going to look at these absolute values real quick. Okay, 3. The absolute value of 3 is 3. The absolute value of -3, well, that's also 3. Oh, so the absolute values of the first coordinates are the same. So the points themselves aren't the same. 3 and -3 aren't the same number, but they have the same absolute value. If I want to now know, well, what are some of the differences in these coordinates? The differences in these coordinates, well, there's the super obvious apparent one that we can see directly ahead. And that is that we can see that the first coordinates are opposite numbers. This first coordinate for my first point is 3. The opposite of 3 is -3. So my first coordinate is the opposite of the first coordinate in my second point. First coordinate in my first point is the opposite of the first coordinate in my second point. My x coordinates are opposite numbers. Or my first coordinates are opposite numbers. Now that we've talked about the coordinates, we can talk about their location. Excuse me. Sorry, I need to change that font so that it works. So we can now talk about their location. Their location, we talk about, well, where these points are. Well, what's similar about where they are? Well, if I want to talk about how far they are in reference to each axis, well, how far are they from this x-axis? Well, this blue point is 1, 2, 3, 4 away from the x-axis. This red point is 1, 2, 3, 4 away from the x-axis. And they're both going in the same direction. They're both above the x-axis. So my y, well, not my y coordinate, my points are both 4 above the x-axis. So they're both 4 above the x-axis. What about in relation to my y-axis? Well, this one is 1, 2, 3 away from the y-axis. This one is 1, 2, 3 away from the y-axis. They're both 3 away from the y-axis. Not in the same direction, but they are both 3 units away from the y-axis. They're in opposite directions, which in fact, if I want to talk about my differences in location, I can easily say they are in opposite directions away from, well, I think we can phrase that a little bit better. They are on opposite sides of the y-axis. One of them is on the right, the other one is on the left. Now we need to talk about the relationship between coordinates and location on the plane. Well, I think the best thing to focus in is our differences. Well, they're opposite numbers and they're also on opposite sides of the y-axis. So, well, let's make sure that we talk about which ones are opposite numbers. So, the x coordinates are opposites. So they are on opposite sides of the y-axis. So when the x coordinates are opposites of each other, they're on opposite sides of the y-axis. Well, that should make sense. One of the things we found out yesterday was that y-axis is on where x is equal to 0. So, of course, my opposite numbers are going to be on the opposite side of 0. They're both the same distance away from 0, just in opposite directions. So, of course, they're the same distance away from the y-axis, just in opposite directions. Another way to look at this is to imagine as if there's a mirror along my y-axis. If there was a mirror along my y-axis, somebody standing at this blue point would see somebody who looks like they're standing right there. What we've done is we've reflected over our y-axis. One point is reflected over the y-axis to get the other. So it's the same distance away from the y-axis. I'm reflecting it. Just like a mirror. Let's see if we find anything that's similar in this next group. For this next group, we have 3, 4, same point. Now we have 3, -4. So we're going to have to pick out a new color for that one. This one's going to be our green point. So we already have 3, 4 plotted. This time we're going to plot 3, -4. So our x value is 3, our y value is -4. Or we can talk about how that tells us to go to the right 3 and then down 4. Almost right away, you hopefully can be able to see some similarities, but also some differences between what we just did and what we're doing now. Why am I still drawing? But first of all, before we can get into talking about their location again, we need to once again talk about the coordinates themselves. In this case, as opposed to that last one, the last one said that the second coordinate is the same on both points. In this case, it's the first coordinate is the same on both points. In the last one, it was that the absolute values of my first coordinates were the same. And well, that is still technically true. It's unimportant because we know that they're the same. But the absolute values for my second coordinates are going to be the same this time. The absolute value of 4 is 4, And the absolute value of -4 is also going to be 4. So the absolute values of the second coordinates are the same. So instead of being the second coordinate that's the same, now our first coordinate's the same. And our second coordinate, if I want to talk about my differences now, I can now say that the second coordinates are opposite numbers. Because 4 and -4, they're both the same distance away from 0. They're both 4. That's what the absolute value told us. But they're in opposite directions. One goes up, the other one goes down. And, well, that being said about up and down, we can talk about our location. And our locations are going to be very similar to what we've already looked at. But instead of my points both being 4 above the x-axis, my points are both 4 away from the x-axis. Only one of my points is 4 above, the other is 4 below the x-axis. But they're still both 4 away. And I can also say that they are both 3 units to the right, I almost wrote left, of the y-axis. We can go on up and we can look at that. This point right here, 1, 2, 3, that's to the right of the y-axis. 1, 2, 3, that's 3 to the right of the y-axis. So instead of it being 3 units to the right, instead of being on opposite sides of the y-axis, this time they are on opposite sides of the x-axis. And we can now go into our relationships between the coordinates. And again, we're going to focus on those. Sorry about that. We're going to again focus on those differences. So the differences said the second coordinates are opposite numbers, and they're on opposite sides of the x-axis. Remember, our second coordinate is our y-coordinate. So we can say the y-coordinates are opposites, which they are. We figured that out in the differences of coordinates. So they are on opposite sides of the x-axis. And we know that. We found it out over here in our differences in location. So if the x-coordinates are opposite of each other, they're on opposite sides of the y-axis. And if the y-coordinates are opposite, then that means they're on the opposite sides of the x-axis. We can also talk about that same type of reflection that we had talked about. This time, instead of reflecting over that y-axis, we're going to reflect over this x one. If somebody was standing here on this blue point and they were looking at a mirror that was placed over here on the x, they would see it would look as if someone was standing over here, this far away. So we can say one point is reflected over the x-axis to get the other. We have one more point to go through. This one, we have 3, 4, and -3, -4. So -3, -4, we haven't seen before. We're going to make this our orange point. So -3, 4, that tells us to go to the left 3, down 4. So that's going to be right here. Our similarities between the coordinates, it's a little shaky this time. Looking at it right away, I don't see any similarities until I look at the absolute values. We already discussed that the absolute value of 3 and -3 is the same. And the absolute value of 4 and -4 is the same. So the absolute values of the first coordinate, the absolute value of the first coordinates are the same. And the absolute values of the second coordinates are the same. Oh, well, that moved that down. Well, that's fine. Not a big deal. So the absolute values of these first values and these first coordinates and our second coordinates, they're both the same. 3 is 3, 4 is 4. But instead of the first coordinates being opposite numbers and then, or the second numbers being opposite numbers, both coordinates are opposite numbers. Looking at location, let's look at location. Well, let's see where this one is. This one's 3 to the right, 4 up. This one's 3 to the left, 4 down. Well, I'm still following that same pattern of 3 horizontal and 4 vertical. If I'm going to talk about distance from my axes, this one is 4 away from the x-axis. This one's 4 away from the x-axis. This one's 3 away from the y-axis. This one's 3 away from the y-axis. So they're the same distances away from the axis. I can say my points are both 4 away from the x-axis, and they are both 3 units away from the y-axis. Now, instead of saying they're on the opposite side of the y-axis or on the opposite side of the x-axis, I'm going to say, didn't make that bigger, it's my mistake. They are on opposite sides of both axes. On the opposite side of the y-axis and on the opposite side of the x-axis. Now, well, we combine our differences just like we had before. And now our differences, I don't need to scroll up to see the differences in coordinates anymore. It was all planned. So, both coordinates are opposites. As we know, both coordinates are opposites, both my first and my second, my x and my y. Both coordinates are opposites. So they are on opposite sides of both axes. Or 1 point is reflected over one axis and then the other axis to get the other. I'll specify other point. So 1 point, I can reflect this point, this blue point, over the x-axis and then over the y-axis to get my orange point. Or if I don't want to reflect over the x-axis first, I can decide, you know what, I'm going to reflect over the y-axis. I can reflect over the y-axis and then over the x-axis, and I'm still going to land on that same point. It doesn't matter which one I reflect over first. I'm still going to get there. I'm still going to get to the same point. So that is example 1. We've looked at these opposite numbers. What's similar between them? What's different between them in terms of location, in terms of the coordinates? We came up with a few rules about reflection. And those rules about reflection are going to help you in your exercise. So with that, as I mentioned, it is your turn to go through and do that exercise. If anybody needs any help, let me know. Send me a message on Schoology, and I will be available. But with that, I hope you all have yourselves a great day. I will see you all tomorrow. Farewell.